While transporting the man they've kidnapped, Vahid's van breaks down. When they resort to pushing the van through the busy streets of Tehran, the scene is shot in an unusual way, with the camera hidden on a nearby rooftop. This is done for an important reason. In another scene, Shiva gets out of the van to go speak with someone. As she crosses the street and begins arguing with the man, the camera does something strange. It stays inside. These are just two of the many signs that the film was shot in secret to avoid the detection of the Iranian government. Much of it was just an accident. The latest film from Jafar Panahi, nominated for 2 Oscars this year, takes place in more remote locations. In places like this, you can stage lookouts to alert the filmmakers so they can hide the cameras if the police come along. But when shooting in more populated areas, the camera almost always stays hidden inside a car. This doesn't stem from unwarranted paranoia. By the time Panahi was making this movie, he had already been to prison for filmmaking twice. And as he promotes the film abroad, he's received a 3rd prison sentence, waiting for him upon his return to Iran. Despite this undercover approach, it's surprising how little effect it has on the overall film. If you weren't paying close attention, you might not even notice. Yet the effortlessness with which Panahi now wields this clandestine style didn't arrive overnight.
چون فقط اونجا گفتن 20 سال ممنوعیت از ساختن هر نوع فیلم، 20 سال ممنوعیت از فیلمنامه نوشتن، 20 سال سفر، 20 سال هم مصاحبه. نگفتن بازیگری و خوندن فیلمنامه که جرم نیست.
For many directors, a 6-year prison sentence and a 20-year ban on filmmaking for the alleged crimes of propaganda against the regime would be enough to make them change careers or flee the country. But after his ban, Panahi, who had already been a director for 15 years at that point, just kept making movies. At first, he tentatively tested the waters. This Is Not a Film was shot within the confines of Panahi's apartment and was smuggled out of the country to the Cannes Film Festival. But by taxi, his 3rd film made illegally, he had become bold enough to shoot within the semi-public setting of a car.
به نظرم میشه از این ور بریم خیلی ممنون. میریم شهرام. متشکرم. اینا آقاخانه‌های بازیگر بودن دیگه.
This is a metafiction about himself as a taxi driver. The story is told through Panahi's interactions with the different passengers as he drives through the city. One scene from the film explicitly addresses the strict content guidelines placed on any film that screens legally in Iran.
عدم رعایت حجاب و شؤونات اسلامی، تماس زن و مرد، پرهیز از سیاه‌نمایی، پرهیز از خشونت، ممنوعیت استفاده از کراوات برای شخصیت‌های مثبت.
Perhaps particularly relevant to Panahi's work are the limits placed on so-called sordid realism. By the time he shot No Bears in 2022, he had become bold enough to shoot outdoors in rural areas, skipping from one small village to another anytime the police came looking. This time, telling a fictionalized version of how he goes about making his films in secret. It was after this film that he would land in prison for a 2nd time. Vahid has kidnapped a man with a false leg. He suspects this captive is someone who tortured him in prison. But as the man protests, Vahid begins to doubt. He wants revenge, but he does not want to harm an innocent man. So he starts tracking down some other prisoners who were tormented by the same captor in order to verify he has the correct person. This is the setup for the rest of the film, which is one of the best of last year. It's full of suspense, a surprising amount of humor, and it ultimately grapples with the central question. How do you respond to people who have oppressed you? When is violence or revenge justified? This ethical question that runs through the heart of the film is not a hypothetical thought experiment for Panahi or the other Iranians on screen. Panahi based the movie on his experiences in prison and the stories he heard there.
بعد اینکه شما رو گرفتم بعد 2 هفته دوباره اومدن سراغ من. به جرم اجتماع تبانی و تبلیغ علیه نظام منو گرفتن.
But it is not just the film's real-world political relevance that make it compelling. It is the perspective that Panahi takes on these issues, the way he presents it, that I find most interesting. His perspective not just on politics and violence, but on human beings. A young girl walks the streets of Tehran alone. She is trying to make her way home since her mother didn't show up to pick her up from school. This is Panahi's second film, The Mirror. It would be the last movie Panahi would make without any legal trouble. Many hallmarks of what would come to define his work are already present, most notably the way he sees humanity and the world around him, his ability to capture that vision on film. It's an incredible movie, one I want more people to watch, and it's half the reason I wanted to make this video. On the surface, The Mirror is about this young girl and her journey. We watch the whole film play out at her eye level. When she interacts with adults, we often don't see their faces. The camera isn't observing her from inside the world of adults, but from within her world. And by doing this, the city around us takes on the kind of overwhelming force that a young child would face. But this unfolds with a great deal of nuance. It's not just a story about the frightening reality of the city confronting the child. It's also about her courage, independence, and even competence in navigating this space. There's another side to the story that lends it even more depth, and that's the texture and realism of the world that surrounds her. We see Tehran with a kind of documentary realism. We overhear many conversations between adults. And in the periphery of this child's journey home, we glimpse a nuanced portrait of a place. Through Panahi's eyes, as he gives us the perspective of a child, we see clearly the humanity of the city. The people portrayed here aren't a singular homogeneous mass, but a collection of individuals with different perspectives and ways of existing within the constraints their society has placed on them. What I find impressive about Panahi's work is that he offers this kind of nuance to every character he portrays.
فکر کنم یه کله ملقی اون تو زده.
ژیمناستیکش خوب میشه.
You don't realize how bold the opening of It Was Just an Accident is the first time around. You simply meet a man driving his family home late at night. They accidentally hit a dog. And after some car trouble, they stop to get help. This is where Vahid recognizes the sound of the leg. Based on the context available to a first-time viewer, Vahid seems like he might be the villain of the film. The man he kidnaps doesn't seem particularly threatening or evil. It's only later we hear about how horrible of a person he might be. Just in case it's not clear, the movie Panahi makes fresh out of prison opens by humanizing the character that represents the captor. Later, as the characters are arguing about what to do with their suspected tormentor, after they reveal the stark reality of just how horribly they were treated as prisoners, as they're debating the kind of punishment he deserves, it's at this very moment that Panahi chooses to remind us of something.
کی بود؟
دخترش بود، داشت گریه میکرد، میگفت حال مادرش بد شد، افتاده وسط آشپزخونه.
I don't see this as a shallow attempt to subvert our expectations or build suspense. Panahi is simply bringing the reality of the consequences of any violence to our attention. They know that if they harm this guy, they'll risk harming his innocent daughter. They know that to help his daughter, they'll put themselves at risk. The question it leaves us with, perhaps the most relevant question to the world right now, is whether it is ever justifiable to knowingly allow the innocent to be harmed, to treat a child as collateral damage.
حمید آقا باشه اصلا هر چی تو میگی ما خاکستری ما اصلا قهوه‌ای یادمون هم هست همینایی که شعار بهش آزادی میدادن الان کارشون شده کشتن جوانای مردم تو اذان صبحشون.
I was in the middle of editing this video when the United States and Israel decided to start bombing Iran. One bomb killed Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, who just recently presided over the massacre of tens of thousands of protesters. Another bomb, which early reports are indicating was most likely launched by the US, struck a girls' school, killing over 100 civilians, most of them children. It is impossible to separate the meaning and significance of "it was just an accident" from the political context that is still unfolding as I make this video. It would be similarly impossible for me to give an accurate, thorough, and nuanced account of all of that context in this video about a single movie. Neither I nor "it was just an accident" have easy answers for what is an incredibly complex situation. What Panahi does do with this movie is ask some incredibly difficult questions that are very relevant to everything that's happening now. Even without this context, the question of justice and nonviolence is already an incredibly fraught subject. In "It Was Just an Accident," Panahi tackles this subject in a daring way by doing what he's always done, showing things in their uncomfortable complexity without reducing things to the binary of political propaganda. He tries to view the conflict not through abstract narratives, but by seeing the humanity of each person involved. This, of course, is an easy way to upset people, because while you're trying to see the humanity in all of these perspectives, you cannot force the viewer into siding with a particular view. When some or even both of the parties involved have committed incredible atrocity, humanizing them or anyone associated with them can feel like the worst possible thing.
شیوا جنگه شوخی نیست تو جنگ نکشی میکشنت بجز اینه.
For those who see their view as the objective truth that must be fought for, anything other than a total commitment to that view can feel like a betrayal of everything they believe in. This is even further complicated by the role propaganda plays in all of this. I have seen expressed on every type of media, expressing every kind of perspective on this conflict, the accusation of propaganda for one side or the other. And it's made me wonder, is it even possible for an artist to engage with a topic like this in a way that isn't propagandistic? How does an artist or film navigate these waters? Can you even engage with the complexity and nuance of differing views without resorting to a watered down both sidesism that tries to use neutrality as an escape from uncomfortable questions?
قشر خاکستری هم بالاخره زبون وا کرد. انقدر حرف نزدی ببینی باده داره از کدوم ور میاد بپری تو باد.
It might surprise you to learn that Jafar Panahi does not consider himself a political filmmaker, choosing instead to call himself a social director. But I want to be clear, I don't think this is the kind of meek attempt to claim neutrality that we've seen from some artists recently who naively hope their work can be apolitical when ultimately any perspective has political implications. Instead, I think this has to do with how Panahi approaches politics through his work, what I think is the core of how he avoids creating propaganda. But if this is possible, how can it be done? What sets a piece of political propaganda apart from a movie that engages with political ideas in an artful way? In a recent interview, he said, "In my definition, a political filmmaker is somebody who belongs to a party and who defends a specific ideology. And so they make a film that defends their ideology, in which the good people are the people who observe and respect this ideology, and the bad people are those who are against them." Propaganda works by crafting a narrative that simplifies complex realities into reductive binaries, by portraying one side as so irredeemably evil that violent force is the only option left, and then portraying the other side as already justified in whatever they do because they're inherently on the side of good. If Panahi seems to condemn anything in his films, it's not specific people or parties, but instead the underlying systems of thinking or ideas that lead to those people or parties taking harmful action. I don't think this is an attempt to ignore the harm that individuals or parties may have done.
موضوع رو سرسپرده رو با یه ساختار اشتباه میگیری.
بابا ساختار کدومه؟ دیوونم کردی. ساختار رو همین پوفیوزا ساختن دیگه.
Instead, I see it as an attempt to get to the root cause of the issue. This is the tension that's revealed in the film through Shiva and Vahid's skepticism of their own violent impulses.
ولی اگه اونا با خشونت با ما برخورد کردن، ما هم باید با اونا با خشونت برخورد کنیم. همین این چرخه کی تموم میشه؟
Vahid and Shiva know they've suffered an injustice, and they have a completely understandable desire to seek justice by taking revenge on the man they believe was their captor. But they also know it was their captor's system of thinking, the political and ideological narratives that he bought into, that allowed him to strip them of their humanity so he could justify violence against them. They want to be sure they don't fall prey to the same kind of dehumanizing logic that their oppressor did. The logic of propaganda relies on dehumanization, flattening the people involved into background characters, extras, or NPCs in a simplified story about nations and geopolitics. Panahi defies this by looking through those political narratives. Not because they don't matter, they're incredibly influential on people's well-being and the course of the world. But we also need opportunities to see the people inside those narratives as people, as human beings like ourselves. To do this, he adopts a humanizing perspective, and it's that humanizing perspective that stands in direct contrast to both propaganda and violent political narratives. Through these characters, he even goes so far as to wonder if we should offer this humanizing lens to our worst enemies, not because they shouldn't be held accountable for wrongs they do commit, but because how can we expect them to respect our humanity if we refuse to acknowledge their own? This is the question Vahid and Shiva have to grapple with in this film, and you'll have to watch the movie to see how Panahi tries to resolve this.
تو که همش میگفتی خشونت بده.
بزدل که نیستم.
But I think it's important to note that Panahi doesn't ask these questions lightly. He does not consider nonviolence naively. He also humanizes the perspective of those who have experienced so much injustice that nonviolence feels impossible. A nonviolent path hopes that freedom and peace can be found by defying the logic of force. It hopes that humanizing tools like compassion, understanding, and the revelation of truth can undermine the dehumanizing logic of violent oppression. If there's any hope in this path, compassionate art is one of the most powerful tools it has at its disposal. Authoritarian governments understand this inherently. It's why they try so hard to control or censor art. It's why they view a camera in the hands of a citizen as such a threat. Panahi doesn't just use "it was just an accident" to ask these difficult questions. It is itself a question waiting to be answered. Panahi has offered his film as a form of nonviolent dissent. And as he returns to Iran with a third prison sentence hanging over his head, he awaits an answer to his own question about what the effectiveness and consequences of that kind of dissent will be. Art critic John Berger talks about whether or not art can serve a social good without becoming propaganda in his essays Revolutionary Undoing and The Ideal Critic and The Fighting Critic. For Berger, this comes down to not the explicit message that is presented through a work of art, but the way the artist's perspective is encoded into the work through how they craft a piece. I think we see this reflected in the work of a director like Panahi, and those essays helped inform this video. You can find them in this collection, which is one of the books I talk about in a recent video I made giving a tour of all the film, media, and art books that I recommend. There are so many books like this one that have informed my perspective over the years, and I wanted a chance to talk about them, so I've started a series of videos to cover my favorites. Part 1 is up right now, and Part 2 will be up next month, both exclusively on Nebula. While you're over on Nebula, you should check out all the other exclusive content over there, including CinemaStick series Let's Rewind, which covers the early careers of legendary actors like Meryl Streep and Samuel L. Jackson. There's also a ton of great Nebula originals like the travel game show Jet Lag, which I love, or Patrick H. Willems' wildly entertaining short film The Dinner Plan, with tons of new originals coming all the time. On top of that, you'll also get all my regular videos early and completely ad-free, along with a back catalog of exclusive video essays that aren't on YouTube. Nebula is a completely ad-free streaming platform built and owned by creators like me. It allows you to watch so much incredible, thoughtful content while supporting the creators you love. So jump into my book recommendations and check out my next video early and ad-free when you sign up today. When you use my link, you'll get 50% off of Nebula, which makes it just $30 a year or $2.50 a month. So visit go.nebula.tv/ThomasFlight, click the link in the description below, or use the QR code on the screen today to watch my bookshelf tour or any of the other great exclusive content on Nebula.